One small act of kindness at a cafe changed a father, a son, and the life of a struggling young woman forever. It was a cold morning, and the city was waking up slowly. The roads were filled with noise, but inside a small cafe on the corner, everything felt calm and warm. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. Grace Miller, a young waitress with kind eyes, was rushing from one table to another. She had been working there for almost 3 years, always smiling, even when her feet hurt or her stomach growled from skipping breakfast. She had learned to smile through pain because she believed kindness made even the hardest days easier. That morning, Grace didn't know her life was about to change forever. Around 9 a.m., the door opened, and a tall man walked in with a little boy in a wheelchair. The man was dressed in an expensive suit, and even without knowing who he was, anyone could tell he had money. His name was Ethan Reynolds, one of the richest men in the city. He was known for his cold attitude and sharp mind. His company built huge buildings, and people said he could turn anything into gold. But the truth was, Ethan's heart felt empty. Since his wife had passed away years ago, he had drowned himself in work, ignoring everything else, even his own emotions. The boy in the wheelchair was his son, Liam. He was 7 years old, born with a physical disability that made it hard for him to move or hold things properly. Liam had a gentle face, but sadness lived in his eyes. He had nurses and tutors, but not much love. Ethan cared for him deeply, but he didn't know how to show it. His way of loving was paying bills, hiring the best doctors, and keeping everything perfect except his heart, which had gone quiet. Grace noticed them immediately. She walked up to their table with her usual warm smile. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" she asked softly. Ethan barely looked up from his phone and said, "Just a coffee." And for him, he gestured toward Liam. "Whatever he wants." Grace bent down a little to Liam's level and asked kindly, "Hey, buddy, what do you like to eat?" Liam looked shyly at her and whispered, "Pancakes." She grinned. Pancakes coming right up. When she brought the food, she saw Ethan still busy on his phone, while Liam tried to eat. The boy struggled to hold his fork, his small hands shaking. Each time he tried to bring food to his mouth, it slipped. A piece of pancake fell onto his lap. Grace watched quietly, feeling a pinch in her heart. No one helped him. Ethan was reading emails, unaware. Without thinking twice, Grace walked over. She knelt beside Liam, picked up the fork, and said softly, "Here, let's do it together." Liam looked surprised. No one, except his nurse, had ever done that for him, and certainly not like this, with patience and warmth. She fed him slowly, smiling each time he took a bite. "Good job," she whispered as if feeding her own brother. The cafe became silent for a few seconds. Other customers watched in surprise. Some whispered that she shouldn't interfere, but Grace didn't care. She wasn't helping because of pity, she helped because that's who she was. Ethan finally looked up from his phone, ready to say something, but then stopped. His eyes met the scene, Grace kneeling beside his son. Her hair falling slightly forward, her smile soft and kind, and Liam laughing for the first time in days. It hit him like a sudden wave of emotion. For a long moment, Ethan just watched. He had seen employees obey him, clients fear him, and people flatter him, but he hadn't seen genuine kindness in years. Grace didn't even look at him. She focused entirely on Liam, making silly jokes to keep him happy. When the boy spilled a little syrup, she laughed it off. "That's okay. Pancakes taste better when they make a mess," Liam giggled. And Ethan felt something strange warmth. When Liam finished, Grace wiped his hands gently and said, "You did great." Then she stood up and smiled at Ethan. "He's a wonderful kid," she said simply, and walked away to serve another table. Ethan said nothing, but inside, something had shifted. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had talked to him that way naturally, without fear or fake respect. After finishing their meal, Ethan took out his wallet to pay. Grace came with the bill, but he asked, "What's your name?" She looked a little surprised, but replied, "Grace, sir?" He nodded. "Thank you, Grace." That was all he said, yet his tone was softer than usual. When they left, Liam kept looking back through the cafe window. Grace waved at him, and he waved back with a shy smile. She didn't know that small wave would stay in Ethan's mind all day. Back in his car, Ethan found himself thinking about what he had just seen. Why had a simple act of feeding his son touched him so deeply? Maybe because it showed him what he had been missing: real connection. Money couldn't buy that. That night, Ethan sat in his study, staring at the city lights. He thought about Grace again, her kindness, her courage, her smile. She didn't know who he was, yet she had treated his son with more love than anyone had in years. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel powerful. He felt human. Grace, meanwhile, finished her shift, exhausted but happy. She didn't know that the man she had served was a billionaire. To her, he was just a father and his son. As she walked home through the chilly streets, she smiled, thinking of Liam's giggle. "He's a sweet boy," she whispered to herself. Her life was full of struggles, unpaid rent, bills, her brother's hospital needs, but helping someone, even in a small way, made her heart lighter. The next morning, when she arrived at work, her manager told her that a man had called to thank her for her kindness. She didn't know who it was, but deep down, she guessed it was Ethan. Still, she brushed it off and went back to work like always. But Ethan couldn't forget her. That small moment at the cafe replayed in his mind all day: Grace's gentle voice, Liam's laughter, the peace in that short encounter. It wasn't just a random meeting. It was something more. Something inside him told him this was only the beginning of a change he never expected. He didn't know why. But the next morning, he found himself driving back to that same cafe. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about work or profits or meetings. He was thinking about kindness and the woman who reminded him what it looked like. The next morning, the cafe was filled with the smell of coffee and soft music playing in the background. Grace was cleaning tables when the doorbell chimed. She looked up and saw the same man and his son entering again, Ethan and little Liam. For a second, she was surprised. Billionaires usually didn't visit small cafes like this twice. But Ethan walked in quietly, pushing Liam's wheelchair himself, not his driver. There was a different look in his eyes, calm but thoughtful. Grace greeted them with a cheerful smile. "Good morning again." "Same pancakes, right?" Liam nodded excitedly, his face lighting up. Ethan smiled slightly too, though he tried to hide it. Grace guided them to the same table by the window. Liam looked out at the street while she took the order. Ethan set his phone aside this time, something he never used to do. As Grace brought their food, she noticed the change. Ethan wasn't scrolling through his screen or checking his watch. Instead, he was watching Liam and Grace quietly. Observing every small detail, Grace bent down beside Liam again, cutting his pancakes into small pieces. "We'll make sure none of it falls today," she said playfully. Liam laughed. "But I like messy pancakes." Grace laughed with him, and even Ethan chuckled softly. It was the first time in years that someone made both of them laugh in the same moment. After serving them, Grace moved to other tables, but Ethan couldn't stop watching her. She talked politely to everyone, never showing tiredness, even when a rude customer complained about cold coffee. She apologized gently, fixed the issue, and went back to her work without losing her smile. Ethan noticed how people respected her not because of fear, but because of the peace she brought wherever she went. When Grace returned to check on Liam, he proudly showed her how he managed to pick up a piece of pancake by himself. "See, I did it," he said with a bright grin. Grace clapped her hands and said, "That's amazing. You're getting stronger every day." Her encouragement made him glow with pride. Ethan's chest tightened, watching them, not from sadness, but from something softer, something he hadn't felt since his wife was alive: gratitude. After breakfast, Ethan asked for the bill again. Grace brought it and smiled as usual. "I hope you both enjoyed your breakfast." Before he could say anything, Liam blurted out, "Can we come tomorrow too?" Grace laughed. "Of course you can. I'll save a special table for you." Ethan said nothing, but he nodded slightly. That day at work, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Grace. Meetings came and went, but his thoughts wandered back to that cafe. He kept seeing her smile, hearing Liam's laughter. It was strange. She had everything a man could want, but the peace he felt at that cafe was something new. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't expensive, but it was real. The next few days, Ethan and Liam visited more often. Grace would always greet them warmly, and with each visit, a small bond started to grow, not just between Grace and Liam, but also between Grace and Ethan. She noticed how Ethan started to relax a little. He began helping Liam eat, encouraged by her example. Sometimes, even put away his phone completely and joined their little conversations. Grace told stories about her younger brother, about how he loved drawing superheroes, and how she worked hard to support him after their parents passed away. She didn't complain about her struggles. She talked about them with quiet strength. Ethan listened, fascinated. He realized Grace's life was not easy, yet she carried herself with so much grace, her name fit her perfectly. One afternoon, while the cafe was less crowded, Liam asked Grace, "Do you like working here?" She smiled and said, "Yes, I do. I get to meet good people and hear their stories." Ethan looked at her curiously. "You think everyone has a story?" Grace nodded. "Everyone. Even the people who look like they have everything. Sometimes they're the loneliest ones." Her words hit Ethan deeply. It was as if she saw through him through the walls he had built around his heart. From that day, Ethan started opening up a little. He asked Grace simple questions about her day, about her favorite books, her favorite food. Grace, in return, treated him like a normal man, not like a billionaire. She never asked about his business, never acted impressed by his wealth. That made Ethan more comfortable than he had been in years. Liam grew closer to Grace with each visit. He began talking more, laughing more. His doctors had said he was shy and often refused to speak. But now he couldn't stop telling Grace about his favorite cartoons and dreams. She listened with full attention, never making him feel small. One day she brought him a small sketchbook and said, "You can draw your dreams here."
Ow.
Liam's face lit up. Ethan watched quietly, his throat tightening. Grace had done something no therapist could. She made his son happy. One evening, it started raining heavily while they were still at the cafe. The rain tapped on the glass windows softly. Grace brought them both hot chocolate. "On the house," she said with a smile. "Rainy days are for warm drinks." Ethan looked at her and said, "You really care about people, don't you?" She shrugged. "The world needs more kindness. It doesn't cost anything." When Ethan and Liam left that evening, Grace ran out to give Liam an umbrella shaped like a panda. "So you won't get wet, okay?" she said. Liam grinned and held it proudly. Ethan thanked her quietly. But when they walked out into the street, Ethan felt something heavy lift off his heart. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about business meetings or profits. He was thinking about a simple waitress who had reminded him what real humanity felt like. Days turned into weeks. Grace became a part of their small routine. Liam's eyes sparkled every time they entered the cafe. Ethan started talking less like a businessman and more like a father. Grace didn't know how much she had changed their lives. She was just being herself, offering kindness without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, while Grace helped Liam with his juice, Ethan found himself saying softly, "You're good with him." Grace smiled. "He just needs someone to listen." Ethan looked down, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Maybe I should have listened more." Grace didn't respond with pity, only with warmth. "It's never too late." That sentence stayed with him. It echoed in his mind long after he left the cafe. He realized she wasn't talking only about his son. She was talking about life itself. That night, Ethan stood in Liam's room, watching his son sleep peacefully, holding the little panda umbrella beside his bed. For years, Ethan had tried to buy happiness with expensive toys and comfort, but all it took was one kind woman's care to bring real joy back into their world. Ethan knew he'd keep returning to that cafe not for the food, but for the feeling it gave him. Grace had unknowingly become a light in his dark, silent world. And though none of them realized it yet, this small connection was about to change all of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months. The cafe had become more than just a place for breakfast. It had become a quiet meeting spot where three lives crossed paths every few days. Grace always welcomed Ethan and Liam. With her bright smile, and the moment Liam saw her, his whole face would light up. He had started talking more, laughing more, and even trying to feed himself little by little. Ethan noticed how his son's confidence was growing, and deep down, he knew Grace had something to do with that. But behind Grace's gentle smile, her life was falling apart quietly. Every night after her shift, she went home to a tiny apartment where the walls were cracked and the air felt heavy. Her younger brother, Noah, lay in bed most of the time, sick and weak. He had been diagnosed with a rare illness that required expensive treatment. Grace worked 2 jobs to afford his medicines, but lately, the bills were getting too much. The hospital had sent her a notice. If she didn't pay soon, they would stop Noah's therapy. She tried not to cry in front of him, always pretending that everything was okay, even when her stomach was empty and her body ached from exhaustion. Every morning, before leaving for work, she kissed her brother's forehead and promised him, one day, everything will be better. She didn't know how, but she had to believe it. It was the only thing keeping her going. At the cafe, she hid all her pain behind her cheerful attitude. Ethan and Liam never saw her tiredness. They only saw her kindness. But one morning, Ethan noticed something different. Grace's hands trembled slightly when she served their table. Her eyes looked heavier, as if she hadn't slept in days. Liam, being the sweet boy he was, asked Grace, "Are you okay?" She smiled weakly and said, "Just a little tired, buddy. But I'll be fine." Ethan watched her closely that day. She was slower than usual, and a few times, she rubbed her temples as if fighting a headache. When he asked if she needed rest, she simply said, "I can't afford to rest, sir. Life's been a bit heavy lately." She said it so calmly, but those words stuck in Ethan's mind. He had heard people talk about struggles before, but this was different. There was something real in her voice, not complaining, just acceptance. That night, while sitting in his office, Ethan couldn't focus on his work. Numbers and reports meant nothing. His mind kept going back to Grace's tired eyes and the way she still smiled through it all. He felt something tugging inside him, a mix of concern and guilt. He had everything, money, power, comfort, and yet he had never looked beyond his own world. Grace, with nothing but a heart full of kindness, was doing more good than he ever had. Meanwhile, Grace's problems were getting worse. Her landlord had warned her that she was 3 weeks behind on rent. "If you can't pay by next Friday, I'll have to ask you to leave," he said bluntly. She nodded silently, her chest tightening. That night, she sat beside Noah's bed and held his hand. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I'll fix everything." But after he fell asleep, she cried quietly, covering her mouth so he wouldn't hear. The next morning, she went to work as usual. Her eyes were red, but her smile was still there. Ethan and Liam came in, and as always, she greeted them with warmth. She made Liam's pancakes into the shape of a heart and said, "You deserve happy pancakes today." Liam giggled, "You always make me happy pancakes." Ethan smiled faintly, but he could see that her energy wasn't the same. After they left, Ethan found himself sitting in his car, lost in thought. For years, he had believed that money was the solution to everything, but now he realized how wrong he'd been. Grace didn't have money, yet she had something he had lost long ago: humanity. She gave so much without expecting anything back. He wanted to help her, but he didn't want to make her feel small or pitied. That evening, Ethan told his assistant to find out about Grace discreetly. He didn't want her to know within hours. He had her full story in front of him: her brother's illness, her long working hours, her late rent, her unpaid hospital bills. When he read it, his chest grew heavy. He felt ashamed of how blind he had been. This woman had been feeding his son with love while starving herself quietly. He sat in silence for a long time. He remembered how she laughed even when tired, how she cared for Liam like her own child, how she spread light despite being surrounded by darkness. That night, Ethan made a decision: he would help her, no matter what. But he wanted to do it in a way that respected her dignity. The next day, Grace was walking home when she received a call from the hospital. Her heart sank as she answered, expecting bad news. But instead, the nurse said, "Miss Miller, your brother's full medical bill has been cleared." The doctor said treatment will continue without interruption. Grace froze in the middle of the street. Cleared? But how? "I didn't," the nurse replied. "It was paid anonymously this morning." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She looked around as if someone might appear and tell her it was a mistake. She whispered a soft prayer of gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope. But she had no idea who had helped her. The next morning at the cafe, Ethan and Liam came again. Grace seemed lighter, her smile brighter. "You look happier today," Ethan said. She nodded. "Something good happened. I don't know who did it, but my brother's hospital bills were paid. Feels like a miracle." Ethan smiled faintly but said nothing. Inside, he felt something peaceful. Not pride, but warmth. Later that day, when Grace was cleaning up, the cafe manager called her aside. "Grace," he said, "someone recommended you for a special job. A family is looking for a private caregiver for their child. They heard about how patient and kind you are." Grace's eyes widened. "Me? But I've never done that before," the manager smiled. "They said they know you'd be perfect." He handed her an envelope with the job offer. That night, Grace read it at home. The pay was good, and it came with a small apartment for her and her brother. Tears filled her eyes again. It felt too good to be true. "Maybe," she whispered, "my luck is finally changing." But what she didn't know, not yet, was that this wasn't luck. It was the quiet hand of someone she had once helped without expecting anything in return. Ethan had changed her world silently, just as she had changed his, without even knowing it. That night, Ethan stood by Liam's bed, tucking him in. The boy smiled sleepily and said, "Grace is my favorite person." Ethan smiled too. "Mine too," he whispered softly. "In two very different homes." They both went to bed thinking of each other, one grateful for a miracle she couldn't explain, and the other thankful for the woman who had taught him what real kindness looked like. Neither knew that their lives were now more connected than ever, and that soon everything was about to change again. Grace's life had always been a constant struggle, but she carried it with a quiet strength that few people could see. Every day, she woke up before dawn to start her double shift at the cafe. After work, she went to her second job at a small retail store to earn extra money for her younger brother, Noah, whose illness required expensive treatment. She barely slept, and most nights she returned home exhausted, her muscles sore and her mind weary. Yet, despite everything, she wore a smile like armor, never letting the world see the weight she carried. Noah lay in bed most of the time, weak from his illness. He often asked for small comforts, a story before bed, a glass of warm milk, or just Grace sitting by his side. She did all of it, though she was drained from the day. She whispered encouragements into his ear every night. "You'll get better soon, and I'll be right here with you." But when she left the room, she often let herself cry silently, covering her face with her hands so he wouldn't see. She felt trapped between the need to survive and the desire to provide a life for her brother. Meanwhile, the cafe remained her sanctuary during the day, though she had little time to enjoy it. That was where she met Ethan and Liam. Initially, it had been just another table to serve, another routine order to take. But something about the boy's shy smile and the father's distant demeanor drew her attention. Liam needed care, not just from a nurse, but from someone who could connect with him. Grace didn't think of him as someone she was helping. She simply acted out of compassion. Feeding Liam that first day was instinctive. She didn't consider the consequences or who might be watching as weeks went by. Their visits became a part of her routine. She learned little things about Liam, how he liked his pancakes cut into small squares, how he laughed when someone told a silly joke, how he liked certain colors in his drawing books. She remembered these details for each visit. Grace didn't ask for thanks. She didn't want recognition. She just wanted to see him happy, even if only for a short time. And little by little, she noticed the subtle ways Ethan began to pay attention to. One afternoon, Grace was carrying a tray of pancakes to their table when she noticed Ethan watching intently. Something had changed. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or distracted by his meetings. Instead, he observed Liam interacting with her, watching his son's small successes with fascination. Grace didn't notice Ethan's gaze, focused entirely on Liam, helping him eat one small piece at a time. But inside, Ethan felt something stirring, a mix of awe, respect, and a hint of shame. He realized he had never really been present for his son, and here was a woman with no obligation, giving the boy attention and care he had never experienced before, despite the warmth she brought to the cafe. Grace's struggles outside its walls continued. Her landlord had issued a warning about overdue rent, and she had no idea how she would manage the next month's bills. At the hospital, Noah's condition was stable but fragile. Missing a single treatment could worsen his health. Grace worked tirelessly, yet it never seemed enough. She had to fight every day just to keep life moving forward. One evening, after a particularly long shift, she received a notice from the hospital stating that her brother's treatment fees were overdue. Her heart sank. She had no money to pay it and couldn't ask anyone else for help. Grace sat on the floor of her tiny apartment, her back against the wall, feeling a weight she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. Her hands shook as she thought about Noah, her brother who relied entirely on her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she tried to remain silent so as not to disturb him. She whispered a promise, "I'll find a way. I'll never let you down." That night, Grace went to bed exhausted and anxious, knowing she would have to get up before dawn for another grueling day at the cafe. Yet despite her fatigue, she slept with a small spark of hope. For the first time in months, she remembered Liam's laughter and the joy in his eyes. It reminded her why she continued to work so hard and care for others, even when her own life was crumbling. Meanwhile, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Grace and the way she treated Liam. For the first time in years, he questioned the world he had built around himself. He had everything money could buy: power, luxury, and comfort, yet none of it had given him the warmth he had seen in Grace's actions. That evening, he reflected on how he had spent years focusing only on work and profit, neglecting the emotional needs of his son. Grace had unknowingly opened a door to a part of his heart he thought was long gone. The next day, as Grace served Ethan and Liam their breakfast, he noticed that she looked more tired than usual. Her smile was still there, but there were small cracks, a slight trembling of her hands, dark circles under her eyes, and a hint of weariness in her voice. He asked lightly, "Are you feeling okay today?" She paused, glanced at him, and said softly, "Just a little tired, sir. Life's been heavy lately." Ethan felt a pang of concern. He realized that her kindness toward his son was not without personal cost. After they left, Ethan asked his assistant to discreetly find out about Grace's life. Within hours, he learned about her struggles, the bills, the tiny apartment, her brother's illness, and her double jobs. Ethan's chest tightened as he read through the information. He felt a mix of admiration and guilt. Admiration for the strength she carried despite her burdens, and guilt for how oblivious he had been to the hardships of those around him. Grace, unaware of Ethan's thoughts, continued to work as usual. She served every customer with her warm smile and bright energy, ignoring the ache in her body. She had learned to live like this, pushing through exhaustion, keeping her struggles private, and offering kindness even when she had very little left to give. She didn't know that her actions had already begun to change Ethan. One afternoon, Ethan watched Grace gently wipe a syrup stain off Liam's shirt while simultaneously talking to him about his favorite cartoon. Her patience and attention amazed him. He saw how she encouraged small successes and celebrated tiny victories. Each gesture made him realize that the care she gave his son was something money could never buy. Ethan felt a desire to help her, but he didn't want to humiliate her or make her feel indebted. He needed a way to support her without taking away her dignity. That evening, Ethan sat in his office, thinking about how he could make a real difference in Grace's life. He reflected on how a single act of kindness feeding his son had brought joy to both Liam and himself. He wanted to extend that kindness back to her. He thought about her struggles and realized that someone who gave so much without asking for anything deserved help, not charity. He wanted to change her life, just as she had unknowingly changed his. Meanwhile, Grace returned home to her tiny apartment and saw a letter waiting for her. It was from the hospital. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The letter stated that her brother's medical bills had been fully paid by an anonymous donor. Grace froze in disbelief. She sat down on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. Relief and gratitude washed over her. For the first time in months, she felt hope. Someone had helped her in her time of need without expecting anything in return. The next morning at the cafe, Grace seemed lighter, happier, and more energized. Her smile returned in full, and Liam noticed it immediately. Ethan watched from across the room, his chest feeling lighter too. He realized that the small acts of kindness had already started a ripple effect. Grace's world was beginning to change. And in doing so, she was teaching him the true value of compassion. Little did Grace know that the anonymous help she received was Ethan's doing. He had used his resources to lift her burden quietly, without revealing his involvement. He wanted her to experience relief and opportunity without feeling indebted to him. For Ethan, it was a chance to give back the same kind of warmth Grace had shown to his son, a gift freely given. Out of genuine care and respect, that evening Grace prepared dinner for her brother. Smiling as she recounted Liam's excitement at the cafe, she felt a strange lightness she hadn't felt in months. Somewhere in a quiet corner of the city, Ethan sat in his office thinking of Grace and feeling that same lightness. Both of them, separated by circumstance, but connected through compassion, were beginning to understand that even small acts of care could change lives in ways no one expected. And though neither of them knew it yet, their lives were on a path towards something much bigger. Grace's struggles had begun to ease, and Ethan's heart had begun to open. The next step, the moment when their worlds would truly intertwine, was about to arrive, and it would change everything for them in ways neither could have imagined. If you want, I can now continue and write part 4 in 1,100 words in the same simple and interesting style, where Ethan begins changing Grace's path directly. Do you want me to do that next? Grace's life had changed completely, but the transformation was just beginning. Moving into her new role as a caregiver for the family had given her stability and a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Her days were filled with structure, love, and work that mattered, and she was finally able to provide her younger brother, Noah, with the medical care and comfort he needed. For the first time in years, she felt like there was hope for the future. She could sleep at night without fear of bills piling up or missing her brother's treatment. Even in this new life, Grace's heart never forgot Liam. She would often think of his laughter at the cafe, the way he had learned to feed himself, and the small victories they had shared together. Those memories reminded her of why kindness matters and how a simple gesture could create ripples that no one could predict. Every time she remembered that first morning, when she fed Liam while Ethan watched quietly, she felt a quiet warmth in her heart. That moment had not only changed Liam's life, but it altered the course of her own as well. Ethan, on the other hand, was undergoing his own transformation. Watching Grace step into her new role had affected him deeply. For years he had believed that wealth and power could solve everything, that success could replace human connection. But seeing Grace, with no wealth, no influence, and nothing but her heart and strength, succeed in changing lives made him realize the emptiness of his previous approach. He began spending more time with Liam, not as a busy businessman, but as a father learning to be patient, kind, and present. He observed Grace's dedication from afar and reflected on his own life. Understanding that love and attention were the greatest gifts he could give, one afternoon, Grace had finished her morning routine and was helping the child in her care with a drawing activity. The boy, shy at first, began to open up, coloring brightly and showing pride in his work. Grace encouraged every little effort, praising his creativity and persistence. In that moment, she felt a deep satisfaction. This was her purpose, helping children feel seen and valued. Just as she had done for Liam, she was creating moments of joy and empowerment. Meanwhile, Ethan watched quietly from the doorway, leaning against the frame. He had been invited to observe, to see how Grace worked with the child, and he could barely hold back the admiration he felt. Her patience was remarkable. Her ability to guide without controlling was inspiring. and the compassion she radiated seemed endless. He realized that he had not only changed her path by helping her with the opportunity and financial stability, but had also been learning from her example. She had taught him what it meant to truly care without conditions. Liam's presence in their lives continued to be a gentle reminder of how far they had all come. Whenever he visited Grace, he was filled with excitement. Running to hug her and showing her small drawings or telling her stories he had created, Grace's heart swelled with affection for him, and she took care to encourage his curiosity and imagination. Ethan noticed the bond between them and realized that Grace had given Liam something he himself had struggled to give: a sense of normalcy, joy, and connection. One evening, after a long day, Grace returned home to find Noah smiling at her. "Guess what?" he said softly. "I met a new doctor today, and she says I'm getting better." Grace hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "I told you we'd get through this," she whispered. That night, as she tucked him into bed, she reflected on everything that had happened: the long shifts, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, and now, the unexpected change in their lives. She realized that her kindness toward Liam, which had seemed like a small act at the time, had brought about this new chapter, a chapter filled with hope and stability. Ethan continued to support Grace, though he did so quietly and respectfully. He ensured that her brother's treatment continued without interruption and that her new living situation was comfortable. He also made sure that Grace's work environment was stable and supportive. He never imposed himself or made her feel indebted. Instead, he gave her the freedom to thrive on her own terms. In doing so, he was also learning how to live differently, with attention, care, and humility. One rainy afternoon, Grace and Ethan found themselves together at the cafe where it all began. Liam was playing nearby, drawing pictures of the rainy city with crayons. Grace watched him and smiled, enjoying the simple happiness of the moment. Ethan sat quietly, observing her. He finally spoke softly and without the formal reserve that usually surrounded him. "Grace, you've changed everything. For him, for me, for so many people." Grace blinked in surprise. I didn't do it for that," she said. "I just wanted to help a child." Ethan shook his head. "But you did more than you know. Your kindness created opportunities, healed hearts, and reminded me of what matters." Grace felt a warmth in her chest. For so long she had worried about money, bills, and survival. Now she realized that her compassion, her patience, and her care had created ripples far greater than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about the cafe or Liam. It was about the way her choices, small as they seemed, had impacted lives in profound ways. She had made a difference, and in doing so, she had also transformed herself. As the days passed, Grace fully settled into her new life. She became a trusted and beloved caregiver, creating a home of warmth and encouragement. Noah's health improved steadily, and she could finally relax, knowing he was safe and supported. Liam continued to thrive, learning new skills and growing in confidence under her guidance. Ethan, observing all of this, found a new way of relating to his son, one filled with patience, attention, and genuine care. One evening, Grace and Ethan sat quietly together after a visit with Liam. "You know," Grace said softly, "I never imagined my life could change this much. I always thought I was just surviving, doing what I could to keep going. But now, I feel like I'm living." Ethan nodded. "You've taught me something I had forgotten, that life isn't about what we have, but about what we give and how we connect with others." Grace smiled, realizing that the transformation was mutual. She had changed Liam's life, given her brother hope, and built a meaningful path for herself. And Ethan had been changed too, learning how to care deeply, how to observe patiently, and how to value human connection above all else. In the weeks and months that followed, Grace's confidence grew even more. She became a mentor to other caregivers, sharing her experiences and offering guidance to those who struggled as she once had. She found joy in small victories. Whether it was helping a child learn a new skill, watching Noah laugh, or simply knowing that she had created a positive impact on someone's life, Ethan continued to support his son and Grace indirectly, always respecting their independence while ensuring that they had the resources to thrive. His transformation was quiet but profound. He was no longer a man defined by wealth and power, but by love, presence, and understanding. He had learned from Grace that kindness could inspire change far more powerful than money or influence. Eventually, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the first day she fed Liam, how small that act had seemed, and yet how significant it had been. That one moment of care had set off a chain of events that changed multiple lives, including her own. She realized that her struggles, though painful, had prepared her for this moment, for the chance to use her strength and compassion to make a real difference. Ethan, watching her from afar during one of their visits, felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility. Grace had reminded him that true power lay not in wealth or status, but in the ability to love, to care, and to act with integrity. She had changed the lives of the people around her in ways he could never have imagined. And in the process, she had changed him too. The connection between them, though rooted in the past small moments at the cafe, had grown into mutual respect, admiration, and trust. They had learned from each other. Grace had discovered the value of her own worth and capability, while Ethan had rediscovered the meaning of compassion and presence. Together, though in different roles, they had created a world where love, care, and kindness were the guiding forces. By the time the story reached its quiet resolution, Grace's path had fully transformed. She was no longer defined by struggle and survival alone. She was thriving, making a real difference, and living with hope and purpose. Liam continued to grow in happiness and confidence, and Noah's life was secure and healthy. Ethan had been changed profoundly by her influence. Learning to value emotional connection above all else, the journey that began with a single act of feeding a child had led to a cascade of change, creating opportunities, healing hearts, and forging a new path for everyone involved. Grace's life, once filled with uncertainty and hardship, had become a testament to the power of kindness, patience, and the ripple effect of small acts of love in the end. What began as a simple morning at a cafe had blossomed into something extraordinary. A life transformed, a heart awakened, and a family strengthened by compassion. Grace had not only changed the lives of Liam and Ethan, but had in turn discovered her own strength and the profound impact of a generous heart. Her journey was proof that even the smallest acts of care can create waves that change the world around you.